actually putting potassium or magnesium or chromium into the system, those nutrients activate enzymatic pathways that are shortcuts in the body. It's like running little bits of code that you can enter a prompt and that can save you pages and pages worth of code just with a couple of keystrokes. And it's beautiful, and that's exactly what's happening with minerals.
Hi, and welcome to another episode of the HomeSum podcast. Today with me here, I have Barton Scott. He is a chemical engineer and a researcher and a biochemist, and he is the founder of Upgraded Formulas. Normally on HomeSum, we talk about the environment and well-being, anything that has to do with healthy homes, but we come at healthy homes from a holistic perspective, so it's all about healthy holistic homes. And let's picture it, everything that is under the roof of a healthy home, and you definitely have drawers full of good supplements if you do that. So with Barton today here, we're gonna talk about supplements and what are the best supplements and what's basically wrong with the supplement industry. Give us a big overview of the supplement industry, how it compares to pharmaceuticals, and what's wrong in the supplement industry and what should people be looking out for.
I was fed up with both of those industries, and that's the reason why Upgraded Formulas exists today. Upgraded Formulas really is an answer to what I couldn't find. What didn't work for my mother is I was able to support her in making shifts in her health that ultimately improved her life as she got older. But she was already on medication, to speak to the pharmaceutical side. And as a doctor friend of mine, many friends are the top doctors in the world, and they've done things like take our course for hair analysis to understand, how do you interpret some of what we'll talk about later, which is really seeing your personality on a page and being able to actually improve it. I was able to help her, but ultimately not enough. So unfortunately, she passed in her late 60s. I was in my early 20s. We were very close as a family, and she was a very special woman. I remember thinking, God, the world loses so much when our wisest die young, even beyond just like the love and the warmth that they can give someone. They can just literally help, save people time. They can help in so many ways and support in so many ways. The grandfather-grandmother dynamic, if you're lucky enough to have it, is so beautiful for supporting. Pharmaceuticals played a role in that negatively, unfortunately, and this is just the truth of it, is that the toxicity of pharmaceuticals is something that the body has to overcome, and in addition to getting well. So to go back to what I was saying earlier, a really good doctor friend of mine said that he realized in medical school that he was never going to get someone well using medication. Unfortunately, it's very important that everyone understand is that if you're relinquishing, if you're not holding on to your power and doing something with it and maintaining this sovereignty through approaches like what we'll talk about here, then you won't have a healthy home, a healthy lifestyle, and a healthy family. And there's no chance of it because it's chemically impossible.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but I've heard this idea as well that when you're doing something on a biochemical level, let's say you're introducing molecules that start certain processes, certain healing processes, that there's always a trade-off, or are there could there be some pharmaceuticals that do not have side effects, or do all of them have side effects by definition?
All have some sort of trade-off. It goes back to the energy is neither created nor destroyed concept. So there's some input, and unless it's providing real value on its own, for example, SSRIs, which are mood controllers, they're working on a certain pathway, like the dopamine pathway, for example. What you're doing there is just focusing on one channel and blocking, the reuptake of, serotonin, or modulating something. And that can work for a little while if someone's in a deeply traumatic place or something. But ultimately, you really need the nutritional support to be able to feel the feelings, process it with someone, and digest it in the same way they digest a meal.
I've come across this idea that there were studies looking into selective serotonin reuptake enhancers as opposed to inhibitors, and during trials they were just as effective as in treating depression as the inhibition of serotonin.
Serotonin makes us feel good. So, for example, what are other options there? Well, they're not patentable by a pharmaceutical company, but they're elements like what we're talking about and what I've developed for upgraded formulas, which is a way to get minerals to absorb in the body without requiring the digestive system to do work. Most people have a broken digestive system. I realized that. I realized, my mother in her 60s had that issue. I realized I had deficiencies in my 20s from wrestling and other sports where you're limiting your intake and you're making weight. You can't eat as much, and your output's very high. And, it just caused my levels to be something like unhealthy 80-year-olds.
Because you're sweating a lot, you're drinking a lot, and the food's depleted from minerals anyway, right?
Exactly. The food, congratulations if you're listening to this podcast, you have deficiencies, and that also leads you to assimilating heavy metals more easily in the body. Because minerals play offense and defense. And what I mean by minerals, things like magnesium, manganese, I would say calcium, but most people have way too much calcium, and I never recommend calcium supplementation unless we look at someone's hair test, which we can ship around the world and we ship to many countries, and see that they actually do need that. But the elements, to go back to this previous example you were talking on, when we were actually putting potassium or magnesium or chromium into the system, those nutrients activate enzymatic pathways that are shortcuts in the body. It's like running little bits of code that you can enter a prompt and that can save you pages and pages worth of code just with a couple of keystrokes. And it's beautiful, and that's exactly what's happening with minerals. So that's a net positive to the system versus a toxicity with drugs.
Yeah.
And drugs are just modulating. It's just trying to modulate. And when we have traumatic experiences in our life, our needs only increase. As I say often, we're redlining at our desks. So we're sitting here, and the version of you that didn't have trauma, whether it was at 6 and it was experiencing something horrific, or it was yesterday, or it was just the lack of trauma, can be the lack of. So not just like experiencing something violent in some way, but also receiving a lack of, so a lack of care. Cried as a kid, even at a non-verbal place, and then no one came, and you felt like you're going to suffocate, and you're genuinely scared. And maybe that didn't make sense, but it happened.
2 days ago, Miriam was just having a conversation with Bini, and she is a breathing expert, but she also used to be, I think, a birthing expert or a midwife, and she was there for the first water birth in America. And they were talking about how the system is kind of set up that when you give birth in a hospital, it's very hard not to have a traumatic birth for the child. You have to work very, very hard. But coming back to the pharmaceuticals versus, let's say, not pharmaceuticals. Mm-hmm. In 2015, I was also diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. And that's when I declined the conventional approach to these immunosuppressants, because I realized they're only masking the symptoms and not treating the underlying cause. Fortunately for me, it worked out, but I went the other way and started treating myself and trying to address the root cause. Of course, it was like a difficult, long road, and I didn't get better until many years. But I'm very happy going down that road. And I completely understand what you're saying with these, the problem with the pharmaceutical industry and problem with the pharmaceuticals per se.
And I believe struggles like that are given to us as an opportunity to be here helping others.
Exactly, because I wouldn't, even though it was a very hard experience and a hard journey, I wouldn't trade it. I wouldn't skip it now after having been through with it.
We wouldn't be sitting here today.
Exactly.
In a very real sense. We wouldn't be, because you wouldn't have the interest, you wouldn't have the knowledge that you have, you would have gone somewhere else with your attention.
Definitely.
And all I had to do was show up today, and you've done everything, in the same way that you used to have audio video background, and that makes all these skills blending together, makes it seamless. So thanks.
And thanks for coming over, and I'm happy to share all this knowledge and to take the knowledge out of you and share it with the audience.